All right, awesome. Well, welcome everyone to our next edition of our Monitoring Basics and Beyond. My name is Kathy Randall. I am a neonatal CNS and nurse practitioner. I am passionate about using bedside monitoring and feel like multimodal is one of the best tools that we can use to kind of see the full picture of our baby or our patient, depending on what population you work with. Just enjoy doing these with Tracy. So thanks for the invitation to be a part of it.
You're welcome. So this is something that Kathy and I have enjoyed doing. I think is this our fourth or our fifth one we've done?
I know, yeah.
Track, it's great. So you guys are really have been great about giving us topics, and we would like you to continue to do that because I'm kind of trying to scratch the back of my brain now and come up with topics for next time. So whatever you guys want to learn about, please just shoot us a message and let us know, and that's what we want to teach you. So my name is Tracy, and a little bit, Kathy and I complement each other well because she lives in the neonatal world and I work in the adult world with a lot of different multimodal monitoring. So we get together every 2 months and we talk about the CNS monitor, and we talk about some of the basic features, but then also some of the more advanced features. So what we thought we would cover today are things that we can do to sort of optimize your system. There is a tab for system configuration that many of you probably have not poked around in, so we'll take a look at that. And then we also want to spend some time talking about data review and data management and what are your options for that. And some of them are available directly on the CNS monitor and others are additional products, but we want to at least introduce you to those so that you have an idea of what's out there and what might work best for you and for your institution. So with that said, I am going to stop my video. I'm going to say hi and bye to everybody. Stop my video if I can find my stop video button. Where did it go? I thought I had it. Let's do it this way.
Yeah, down in your bottom menu there. Yep.
Okay, there we go. So I'm hoping everybody can see the CNS Monitor homepage screen. And I had gathered some data previously, and then I shut down the monitor without discharging the patient. And we don't recommend that you do that, but I wanted to show you what it looked like if that in fact happened. So if someone doesn't discharge their patient and then the CNS monitor gets fired up again, whether it's been an hour later or a week later or a month later, it still holds that data active. And it says, I seem to think that you were monitoring a particular patient. Do you want to continue doing that? And so instead of just seeing the option to admit a new patient, you'll actually see this option up here where we can resume monitoring a patient. So one of the ways that this is actually helpful is if you're monitoring a patient in a room and you have to move that patient to a different room. So the CNS monitor does not have a battery. It needs to be plugged in at all times. So instead of discharging the patient just to move them to a different room, what you can do is you can just shut down the CNS monitor. You can just power it down. You always want to make sure that when you power it down that it goes completely off. It takes about 15 seconds before you unplug it. Then you can unplug it. You can move it to the different room that your patient may be going to. And when you plug it back in and turn it back on, then instead of having to readmit the patient and have a separate data file, you can actually use this resume monitoring feature. So you would be able to do that. So in cases where you're just moving a patient, it's a very, very helpful feature. Where it gets a little problematic is when folks just forget to discharge their patient and they put the monitor back in the closet or wherever it lives, and then a month later someone gets it out or a week later, and that patient has never been discharged. So what that does is it forces the new user to go ahead and actually discharge that patient. So we could either select resume monitoring, in which case it would bring us back directly to where we were when we left off, or we would have to select new patient to actually start monitoring our new patient. So either one is okay, depending on the situation. So we really try in training to emphasize that it's important to discharge the patient when you're done, and that way it's not holding that patient in queue for future monitoring. So I'm not going to actually admit a patient today because we've gone through that several times already. But what I would like to do is go down to focus on these two buttons down here on the bottom. And we're going to start with system configuration, and then we're going to move into some data management functions. So I'm going to tap system configuration, and I just want to go through each of these tabs and show you a little bit more about what you can do with these. So the system information tab is helpful, particularly if you are having some difficulty If your system is integrated into your hospital network, meaning that there's an Ethernet cable that is sending the data to your hospital network for data storage, and we'll talk about that in a little while. If it's not actually connected to the network, you would be able to tell that here because there would not be a network IP address assigned, or it would say that it's not connected or that type of thing. But when you hit that system information button, we have information about the software version that the monitor is running. When was that software build completed? What is the status of the amplifier? What is the IP addresses that have been assigned given particular networks? And then also contact information for Moberg Research, so you can get a hold of us if you need to. So this is sometimes helpful if you're on the phone with any of the engineers or customer support people. They may actually say, hey, go into this area and let us know what software version you're running, because the features and the functions of your monitor are going to depend on the software version that is actually being run on the monitor. So I've had several times to go to this screen and give them that information so that they can actually help work through whatever issues there may be. The select devices is where we go to select what devices the CNS monitor is going to integrate with at your institution. We typically will be having a conversation with you prior to you receiving your CNS monitors, and we're going to ask you what type of, what type of bedside cardiac monitor are you using? Is it a GE monitor? Is it a Philips? Is it a Space Labs? Is it a Draeger? And then we will build your protocol based upon the type of monitor that you're using. If you are in an institution where there are mixed monitors, so maybe there are a couple GE Solars and a couple GE Carescapes, and some of your beds or ICUs might have Philips, that's okay. We can select as many of those as we want. But what that would mean is that when we actually are on our display screens and we're looking for heart rate or we're looking for blood pressure, we would then need to indicate which monitor type that it's coming from, and that's easy to do as well. So patient monitors can be selected. Neuro monitors are the things like the amplifier, blood flow monitors, cerebral oximeters, microdialysis machines, are different types of ICP monitors, brain tissue oxygen, and those types of things. And again, we pre-select these, but you may acquire devices over time, or you may retire devices over time. And maybe you get rid of a particular device and you just want to remove it from your device selection. You can just select or deselect it as you need to. So this is where you can help manage the devices for your institution. So another thing to remember is the fact that each device has some information about it. So you can go to the little eye next to it and you can tap on that and it'll tell you the supported measurements. So for example, the Lycox gives us intracranial temperature as well as brain tissue oxygen. So it gives you the list of all the supported measurements. It gives you additional device information. So we can take a tour of that device from here, spin it around and take a look at it. So this is one of the ways that we can access those information tutorials even before we have a patient put into the monitor. So it tells us all about the theory of operation. So some of the tutorials are more extensive than others. It just depends on how much information the companies were willing to share with Moberg to build those in. But they're certainly worth taking a look at. I'm going to go back to patient monitors for just a moment because this is important when we're looking at the bedside cardiac monitors, because sometimes we get a little bit hung up on, well, it looks like our blood pressure isn't coming across. So each monitor, again, tells us what measurements are supported. And if you look, for example, at a Philips monitor, it will support both labels of ABP, arterial blood pressure, and ART, which is also arterial blood pressure. So one of the things we have to make sure is on our display pages that we have the same label next to our blood pressure as we are indicating is coming out of the Philips, whether it be ABP or ART. Because if you have it labeled ABP on the Philips and you have it labeled ART on the CNS monitor, those channels aren't going to find one another, so your values will not display correctly. So labeling is always important, and that always has to match. And I think we talked about that in a previous session. So devices can be selected and deselected as you acquire and or retire those. But when we ask you before we send the monitors, what type of devices you're using, that's why we do that, because we want to have that set up ahead of time. I know in our last seminar, we talked about events. and we talked about how you mark events, how you label things. This is a place in this edit event names where you can actually go to add a particular category of event. So Kathy tossed out a category for me. What is in this list that you guys have that maybe isn't here?
Yeah, so we add things for neonates, things like for cooling, for giving hypothermia treatment. And I know that that's moving into other areas too, but that would be an area that we would add.
Sure. So we can add an entire category, and then within that category, we can add like cooling started.
Yep, exactly.
And then maybe we want to add rewarming started. Cooling held, that type of thing. So we can add a whole bunch of stuff. So these now become part of our event library, which is really important when we go to mark those events. So this is a great place to go. There is this reset to default button that I want to make you aware of. And what that does is it gives the user the opportunity. I'm just going to hit reset to default. It takes it back to the original categories. And it also gives the opportunity to select whether we are working in the neonatal world. So for Kathy's patients, we would see different types of categories. So positioning of the neonates is really important, the cooling that she just talked about. Or we can look at the standard events, which are the adult events. So typically you'll have the opportunity to select which you're using for your institution, whether it be neonatal or standard. And Kathy was instrumental in helping us build this entire neonatal event library. So that's really great for the neonatal world. So thank you for that, Kathy. That was
well, and all our neonatal customers gave us lots of ideas too.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you'll see with when I selected standard, we now have things like how do we manage an EVD, which neonates are not going to have EVDs. So when we look at EVD management, we leveled the transducer, we opened it to drain, we closed it for ICP readings, that type of thing. The temperature management is going to be different for a neonate than an adult, and we actually have a shivering category in there. So they've been customized based on the population that's going to use it. So that's really great.
That's interesting. So I guess, for PICU too, because we do have some units, some CNS monitors installed in PICU. So it may depend on kind of when you go to set up your monitor for a PICU, I'm speaking just to the customer and thinking ahead, it may be good to look at the standard ones and just think of which patients are you planning to use the CNS monitor on the most frequently, because some of these things for adults may be more applicable to your older patients or to some very specific neurosurgical patients, even if they're very small. So
exactly, yeah.
So I was just thinking that when you were talking EVD, because occasionally we have that in the NICU, but it would be much more common, say, in a PICU to have that. So,
sure.
I think there's probably some crossover depending on the intended use of our customer.
Definitely. Yeah. Very good point. Thanks. Okay. Information index is, again, another way that we can get to those tutorials. So we can look at devices and we can, again, select any of the devices. And I usually pick on Lycox because Lycox really has those great descriptors for they shared a lot of information. Integra was great in sharing a lot of good information with us so that we could build this tutorial. But that's a nice place to be able to get to those informational panels again. So we did it through the information icon in select devices or the information index itself. So next I'm going to go to the system administration button. And typically the bedside nursing staff is not going to have access to this unless you're a super user or the password has been shared. One of the things that has occurred with the very latest software release, which many of you don't have, is the ability to customize those passwords and to really password protect multiple areas within the CNS monitor. And this is really just designed to help prevent accidental erasure of information, accidental, editing of protocols and that type of thing. So you all are probably using various types of software versions. So just in general, there is going to be some type of a password that gets folks into the system administration menu. So some of you do have access to this, some of you may not. But within this menu, we have the ability, this is where we go for software updates. So if we click software update, it's going to ask us how do we, well, we actually would have to discharge our patient first. So that's a good trigger. But it would just ask us how we are intending to update that software. We put a USB drive in and we would just add the new software there. Password setup is where we can go to password protect a variety of different things. We can reset the overall administrative password, which is the one I just typed in. We can set a password to be able to delete data, to be able to archive data, and to be able to manage data. So currently I have those passwords off, but they can be turned on at any time. So for folks who are really protective of their data, they may want to turn on some of those password protected features. And then just please make sure that anybody who needs to access or use or manipulate that data has the password so that they're able to do that, because that would get a little tricky. There is also a service menu, and this is really only going to be accessed when there's a problem with the CNS monitor and someone would be on the phone with you. They would give you the password to that. I don't even know what that is. And that would be where you would go to access some of the log files and to help with actual maintenance and service of the CNS monitor. And then system log is, again, where we would go to look at the button pushes and some of the things that actually can be tracked to find out where perhaps something went wrong or there was a particular failure. Network setup is a good place to go for folks who actually have their CNS monitor interfaced or integrated into their hospital network. So what that means is there is an Ethernet cable that runs into a data port, typically on the boom or on the wall. It's often the similar one that's used to transmit EEG data to your EEG reading areas. But what it does is your IT department works with the Moberg folks, and they actually make space on the IT network for a shared drive. And that allows data from the CNS monitor to go to the shared drive and can be actually used for almost real time. There can be about a 2-minute delay, but so we call it quasi real time or retrospective review of the data files. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is where we would go to set up that archive, how the names, the passwords, all that type of thing for setting up that network and that archive share. And then who is allowed to use it. Usually only specific people are given permission to actually get to that. So these would be things that we would be helping you to fill out and work through. And network interfaces, different types of things. So
quick question. Yeah. I don't know if we've chatted about this on other previous webinars, but if someone doesn't have network set up, but they are interested in that, what would be the process for them to get engaged with the right people at Moberg?
So really they could just reach out to anybody, just probably start with customer support and say, our institution is really interested in integrating our CNS monitor to the network, or if they have the contact information for their local salesperson. And then what would happen is we would set you up with a special project engineer. Currently, that's John Davis. We also have Vince working on that as well. And they need to have a contact within the IT department, and it really is a collaborative effort between the IT department and the Moberg engineers. And then also we need input from whoever's going to be looking at the data, the physician side, the researcher side, the EEG folks, whoever that's going to be, to determine what it is they actually want. And it's a bit of a project because they have to reserve space on the servers where this data is going to flow to, and make sure that there's enough space available and that folks can access it as they need to. So it just really sets up a shared drive. So just, if your hospital is interested, just call customer support and we can set you up with the right people. But it would be good to come prepared with exactly what it is you're looking for, and also the name of an IT person who will help run that project.
I think when we helped to do that at Stanford, it was nice. I think that John emailed us a systems requirement list. So did we have the right security patches and a variety of other very techie things that the
Yes.
IT department understood immediately whether or not we met these criteria or not.
Exactly.
So it was, I can't underscore enough of having that IT champion who understands your workflow in whatever department you're in, and you having a clear understanding of how you think you might use it. Is it just for long-term archiving? Is it for true remote viewing across your network? And so there are many layers to that, but that little network setup button becomes your, like, the only place you go for a really long time as you're working through all of that and having those conversations. So Tracy and I can help with that conversation from kind of a clinical planning and thinking through your workflow. But really, it's the amazing tech support from inside your own institution and Moberg who makes all that magic code happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. It quickly gets out of my scope as a clinical person because I don't begin to understand all the nuances of the IT stuff. So we have experts to walk through that, and your own IT people, they start speaking a language that I barely understand, but somehow it all works out.
Yeah.
And they get that all figured out. So we're going to talk about networking a little bit more.
Yeah. Lawrence is saying, yes, that's so true.
Right. Exactly. Okay, I'm going to show you one more little spot here in system administration, and then we're going to kind of switch over and talk even more in depth about data. So that's good. So in that button that I was in, configuring preferences, we now have the ability to look at some of this applies solely to EEG when we're segmenting video for the EEG. How big is our session size going to be, and how are we doing are we syncing our data on archive, that type of thing. And again, a lot of this is not something that average nurses or clinical users at the bedside are going to be setting up, but more of an administrative type of thing. So one of the new software features is this time approval interval, where if a CNS monitor has been turned off for more than 7 days, and that interval can be selected, 7 days is pretty good. So if the CNS has been turned off for more than 7 days, when you turn it on, it will ask you to actually verify that the time is correct on the monitor. And that's important because maybe there's been a time change. We've gone from daylight to standard time. It gives you the opportunity to update your monitors for correct time, or if anything has drifted. So that's a new feature that helps us keep on track with time a little bit better. So that's great. Okay, so I am going to actually exit the menus, and I want to show you this spot right here, which is called Manage Data Files. And this is one of a couple of options that we have for looking at data. So I'm going to show you, once I get out of this, I'm going to show you a PowerPoint slide that outlines all of the options that we have for reviewing data and for going back and looking at data. But I'll just sort of start pretty basic, and one of the most basic ways is by actually having an active case running. So when we are actively monitoring a patient, and I'm going to have to go back in time a little bit because I'm going to go back to where we actually had data. There, we have some data. That's good. As you know, we can look at the data directly from the screen. We can freeze the incoming data, and we can go back and we can look at the data in that way. So I only had a little bit of data gathered before I turned off my monitor and got to that sort of resume screen. But during that period of time, it's probably right around, I don't know, 1326 or so. Let's see what that does. Yeah, there's a little bit of data. So if I freeze my screen, I can go to a particular time. I can also scroll forward or backward in the data set. So that is how we actively review data on the CNS monitor while it's running. So I think we've talked about that a couple of different times in our previous webinars. So again, what I did is I just hit freeze on the screen, and when I hit freeze, it allows me to go to a particular time or to use my arrows or go back and forth in the data set to look at different things. I can do it on any of my screens. I can go to my waveforms, I can go to my trends, that kind of thing. I can even freeze my EEG data and go back and look at various segments of that. So this is a nice way. It'll take you all the way back to the beginning of the case. So as soon as we started monitoring that patient until the moment we stop monitoring, we can look at real time, and we can also look retrospectively at what happened in previous minutes, days, hours, that type of thing. So that's kind of our first option in terms of reviewing data, looking at data, and seeing what's going on with the patient. So I'm actually going to stop monitoring this patient now. I'm going to discharge them. And it's going to look at the file, and I'm going to hit archive later. All right. So now let's go to this data management file. This is sort of our second option on the CNS Monitor for looking at data. So if I click the Manage Data file, we now have a list of all of the patients that have been monitored on the CNS Monitor. And you'll notice that the most current one is at the top. It's a little bit lighter blue. We have the name of the patient. We have the protocol that was used for monitoring that patient. We know when monitoring started. We know when it stopped. We know what the file size is. And we know, this is one of the most important things, I think, whether that data have ever been archived. So if that case is only sitting locally on the CNS Monitor, it will say that it's never been archived. If it's been offloaded to a thumb drive, or if it's been sent over the network to your share drive, then it would say once, or it would say twice, or how many times it's actually been archived. So one of the things that we really encourage and emphasize is there is an erase button down here, but we really want to never erase a data case that has not been archived somehow. So a lot of times this data, if it's not going directly to your network, the nurses will hit archive later when they're discharging a patient, and this is where the case ends up. It just kind of lands here. And this area, the local storage on the CNS Monitor, is really quite robust. It can hold weeks worth of cases, whether we're talking just trend data or EEG. It can hold an awful lot of information. But eventually, this data management file will get filled up, and you'll have to be able to offload data somehow. So there is an archive tab provided, and when you hit that, it gives you the ability to archive to whatever your CNS Monitor allows. The old CNS 100s used to let us put a DVD in and archive to a DVD. The CNS 200s and 300s really only allow us to archive off to a USB drive or to the network. So if this CNS Monitor was hooked up to the hospital network, there would also be a button that would say network, and you could choose what was available. Many hospitals have the ability on their network to have the data go automatically at certain incremental intervals. So we call that incremental archiving. So perhaps every 2 minutes, you want to have a new bit of data go to your network, and we can actually set it up to do that, so that the data is flowing almost continuously, which is why we call that sort of quasi real time. But each case that is sitting here can be readmitted for review, not to change or add data, but to just review the case. So I'm going to pick on this second patient here. And if I select review, it's going to bring that patient back, and we'll be able to just review that case. So even though that patient has been discharged, we have the opportunity to take a look at that data set. It looks green to you because it was demo data. And the CNS Monitor wants to be sure that we're not confusing demo data with real patient data. So because it was in demo mode, it's going to look green like this. But we can, again, go to a particular time, or we can go back and forth in the record and we can review this particular patient's data. So that's a nice way to be able to actually go back. What you'll notice is on an active case, this last button says stop monitoring, and then that's where you discharge the patient. If the patient is readmitted for review, you don't have the opportunity to pause it. It's just actually going to go ahead and re-discharge the patient. One of the things I'll bring to your attention is when you have readmitted a patient for review, we can actually go in and we can still make some changes. So perhaps your patient was admitted with a trauma number, and even by the time the patient was discharged, we never really knew what their medical record number was, or maybe they were admitted under a trauma name. We can actually go back even after the patient has been discharged, and we can change the name, we can change some of the other admission information. The other thing we can do is even go back and we can do different events. So if we know that certain events have come up and they weren't recorded initially, we can still go back and we can mark an event. So I can pick a different event that happened at a particular time, and I can still add that as an event. So I've just added another event here. So you can still manipulate the record. It will not bring in any additional data, but it does allow you to change the annotations, meaning the patient information or the events within a record that's already been discharged. And that's a very helpful feature because sometimes we learn more information after discharge than we knew at the time that the patient was there. So have you had to do that much, Kathy, with your babies? Go back and alter the record like that?
I think probably just similar to what you've mentioned about more about the naming. We maybe forgot to complete the birthday or those fields, but I won't say that we've gone back and annotated it. I won't say that maybe some of our physician colleagues maybe have, but to add extra events or other things. But us as nurses, I think mostly we just do the patient info.
Great. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's another way to look at information, to review information while it's actually in this local storage. Okay, so we can review, we can archive it from there, we can erase it from there. If you're using a USB drive, or even if you're using the network to store your cases, you can retrieve them from an external device. So if you have data on a thumb drive from a case and you went ahead and you erased it locally from here, maybe I erased this particular case, but I want to bring that case back to look at it, and I want to look at it in the same way as I did when I was looking at it clinically. If we tap Restore from Archive, it will ask us what we're trying to restore from. Most likely we're going to be restoring from a USB, and I don't have one in my computer right now, but if I tap that, it would say, which case do you want to restore? And then it would re-import that case back onto your CNS monitor from the thumb drive. So you can offload and you can upload from a thumb drive to be able to review that data again if you are storing it that way. So that's a very helpful.
I was going to say, just for the educators who might be listening, or if you're planning any training, this has been really a helpful thing to do. So I did a skills lab where we had 3 or 4 CNS monitors. And what was great is we took one patient file and we put it on all of the monitors. And then we could go through together and look at some really interesting pieces, but people could get a lot of experience touching the monitor instead of just huddling together around one. And so I think sometimes for training, this is a really nice feature for being able to show the same case.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Very good application for that. Okay. So I'm going to minimize my my monitor screen here, and I want to show you this slide, and we're going to talk about some of the other ways that we can review data and manage data coming from the CNS monitor. So we already talked about if we are in an active monitoring session, We can hit that freeze button at the top and we can scroll back and forth, or we can go to a particular time. And this lets us look at data real time, or it can be retrospective if you're looking at data from a few days ago. But this is really how we look at data for an active case, is we do that directly on the CNS monitor. That's one of the ways. Local storage on the CNS, that's what we just talked about within that managed data file. So this lets us look at data after the patient's been discharged. So we're looking at it retrospectively, but we do have the ability to readmit that patient for further review if we want to. So that's another way to review and manage data. Some hospitals are adding a small PC to the back of their CNS monitor. We call that the PC application, or a little backpack PC. And on that little computer runs a program called Persist. And Persist is typically used for EEG processing, and it does serve that function on the CNS monitor. But it also allows us to look at the multimodal data trends and to look at other things. So this is a nice way for providers, and sometimes nurses use it as well, but particularly people who are interested in looking at the EEG, to be able to look at what's happening with the EEG for seizure detection, that type of thing. And then we can look at that real time while the CNS is running, and also go back within that record. So again, this is a way to really review an active case. So Persist is actually is a software, is a program that's used by a lot of institutions for their EEG reading. And we are allowed to put that on the CNS monitor and help with the processing of EEG directly on the monitor. It used to have to run on workstations and other areas, but now we can actually put it right on the CNS. So that's a very helpful feature. So for hospitals who are using that, you would actually see down at the bottom of your CNS monitor screen a little button that would say Switch Desktop. And if you have that Switch Desktop button, what it does is opens a new Windows application where it's running Persist. So it can be switched back and forth from active CNS monitoring to this Persist processing. So I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about that. You can go onto the website, and I'm going to switch over to our website in a few minutes, and we can learn a little bit more about that. And you can always ask us if you want more information on that. So integration to the hospital network, this is a very valuable tool, and we talked about that a little bit. This is where you're really going to want to get your IT folks involved. This allows them to set up a shared drive, and an Ethernet cable would take the data from the CNS monitor to the network. And it can be sent there in a variety of time periods. It can be sent incrementally, so every few minutes, every few hours, whatever your hospital chooses. Or the entire case can just get dumped onto the network at the end of the case when the patient is discharged. If they're doing EEG monitoring, it's probably best that it gets sent there incrementally, because then that data is available for your EEG folks to actually look at it. So they can access that shared drive, they can look at the EEG pretty much real time or even retrospectively, and look at it that way. So it's designed for review, and it's also a way for these patient cases to go into a long-term storage file. And then folks who are given permission to access those files can go back and look at those cases at any time. So integration into the hospital network is a really valuable thing. If your hospital is going to do that, we try to encourage them to have that IT infrastructure put into place before we do training, because we want to make sure that everything is up and running at the time that we come to do training, so that we can actually assure that the system is working the way it should. So, Kathy, anything else you want to talk about in terms of networking? I know you've got a lot of experience with that as well.
No, I think you did a great job covering kind of the ins and outs. And because I've not used it on the EEG side as much, that's helpful to hear from you too. Okay, great. So let's talk about something briefly called the CNS Reader. It's actually being rebranded as CNS Envision. So you may hear it referred to as the Reader, you may hear it referred to as Envision, and the name is actually being changed because it's so much more
than just a reading tool. It was kind of initially put out there as something that is used to read EEG, but it does a ton more than that. This is an additional product. This is not something that just automatically comes along with the CNS monitor. But those who used it during its beta testing phases and those who are purchasing it now have found that it is extremely valuable. And what the reader does is it gives us a way to review data actively, so we can look at directly what's on the CNS monitor from a remote location. So it can be on a desktop or iPad, something like that, or it can be for retrospective review. So it's really just a software program that can get uploaded to a tablet or a computer or whatever, and can be used. So for that type of data review, that happens pretty much automatically. The data can also be exported to a variety of different formats, which you see there. So an EDF plus format is what we're going to use actually for looking at EEG waveforms. Text or CSV files are very helpful for reviewing trends and annotating different things. And then MATLAB is usually used for research purposes, but it can be used for looking at waveforms and trends, and then doing some of those more advanced MATLAB type of features. So I want to show you, I'm going to minimize this screen here. If I can get to my minimize button. Whoops, where did it go? Nope, we're going to go back one. And I wanted to show you actually on the Moberg website. So I'm on Moberg ICU Solutions website, and I'm in the products area. And if you look through, there are a bunch of different products that you can take a look at. So if you want to know what the difference is between our 16-channel amplifier and the advanced ICU amplifier, you can find it there. There's information about the video camera. And then there's a section on CNS Reader, which I imagine will soon be retitled to CNS Envision. But here's sort of what the reader looks like. One of the pages. So you can see we're actually integrating processed EEG along with real-time EEG, along with real-time physiologic data and video. And I believe I was able earlier to find a little video. So let me see if I can pull that up for you guys to see. And I'm going to do product demo. And hopefully this will come up. Yeah. So let's take a look at this.
Use the CNS Reader to review, annotate, and generate reports with EEG and other physiology recorded with the CNS Monitor. Quickly review EEG waveforms and add annotations based on standard ACNS terminologies simply by pressing a button. Annotations can be entered at a point in time or for a duration of time. You can review the list of annotations, sort by annotation name or time, and jump to the EEG for an event. You can also review corresponding physiology and video. Modify the display in a variety of ways to meet your review needs. Review and annotate multimodal data with the same powerful tools. The CNS Reader enables simultaneous review of EEG and comprehensive time-synchronized physiology. Using standardized terminology to quickly annotate your patient's data. Configure flexible displays to meet a variety of review needs. The component neuromonitoring system. Comprehensive, easy to use.
Okay. So did that work, Kathy?
Yep, that sounded great.
Okay, good. So again, I show you this not to be an advertisement, but really to just show you that there's so much information that you can get just by going to the website. Is you can poke around and you can look at all of the things that Moberg offers and really get a lot of information about it. But Kathy, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the reader, because I know that you have been really instrumental in helping centers actually get it set up and sort of customized to what they need. So maybe you could speak a little bit about some of the things that you've seen in terms of what it can offer.
Sure. So I think it's just one of these things where just as simple or complex you'd like to make the CNS monitor, you can do the same with the reader. So it really can be flexible and customized to include as many different panels of information as you want it to do. So if you only want to look at vitals, you can only just have a panel that that gives you vitals. So in this little screen, you can kind of see where, the little, where the patient is down in the bottom right-hand corner, and then you see that there's an event list above that. Probably you can appreciate that, those of you who've looked at the monitor a lot. And then you can see that there's some QEEG or DSA at the bottom, some real EEG, and then the vitals. So just like on the CNS monitor, you can choose different pieces that you want to display, and you can manipulate the screen to have, so this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments, and that can be a standard display. You can toggle on and off different pieces of the display. You can pop out. Maybe you want to look at the EEG in more detail and you want to really expand that. You can also define the channels specifically. So usually in the NICU, we're looking at only a couple channels. So it's really a powerful tool. And there are some additional, for lack of better terms, apps that you can install on top of the reader that can make really cool graphs that can be used in real time or retrospectively. So for us, we're very concerned in the NICU if babies are staying within their target temperature for their hypothermia treatment. And we can actually go back, since we put that data into our patient monitor, we can go back and do a review and set those parameters of how much time did the baby stay, between our target temp and how many hours. And you can set the time window for the last shift, the last day, or the entire duration of cooling, 72 hours. So it's really flexible, just for review, but also I just want people to think about, like, what are the things you're already doing on your device, and start with just those on your reader. And then you can go up and down from there. But it takes, again, just like the IT team, there is an amazing team that helps new users to get set up. And we usually take your protocol and then we set up the CNS reader to mirror that. So the things that you've collected, how do you want to see that in review? It can look exactly like that, or you can make it completely different. So it's just, and each user can create their own kind of default way you want to view the data. So if you're doing a research project and maybe you're interested in certain parameters, you can modify the protocol that you want to view for that research study. So it's very powerful, but you just have to, grab a couple patient files, pop them in there, and just start. But Anna at the office can help you out with just a single starting place. And we usually use your current protocol that you're using, or the one they're using most frequently. And then we'll build from there. And then they do some one-on-one kind of customization from there. I hope that helps. Does that explain it?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great. So if anybody wants any more information about this, just feel free to reach out to your local salesperson, or reach out to Kathy and I. We can get more information to you. So that's a way to look at another way to look at data and to manage data. So the last two that I just want to briefly mention, because I want to be sure to have some time with questions, is something called the Multimodal Database. So the database is, again, a project that's done in combination with the IT folks. And what it does is it allows the building and saving of a database of patients, but not so much for individual patient review, but more for looking at the entire patient population that has been monitored with the CNS monitor. It allows retrospective data. It allows data review. It allows queries across a patient population. It has the things built in for statistical analysis. And I'm going to just pop briefly down to this one, and we can take a peek at this as well. And hopefully this video will come across okay. If not, Kathy, stop me.
The CNS monitor collects and time synchronizes physiological measurements from a variety of medical devices to create a comprehensive view of brain status. But to extract meaning from that data, it needs to be coupled with the patient's phenotypic data. The CNS Multimodal Database is the first product to combine both types of data. You can use customized data entry forms to add phenotypic data or common data elements templates. Use the built-in search tools to conduct complex queries on both physiologic and phenotypic patient data and review the patients who match the criteria. Customize the output of your results by selecting measurements of interests, quality metrics, and time span. You can download your data in your preferred format and conduct advanced analysis using a variety of third-party tools. The component neuromonitoring system, comprehensive, easy to use.
Okay, so that's just another way that data can be saved, can be managed, can be used, and this is particularly helpful for folks who are interested in research applications because, again, it allows you to query across a patient population and then has things built in for statistical analysis and that sort of thing. So just a reminder that the website has a lot of really great information on it, and you can go to that at any time. We had talked a little bit earlier about Persist, so if you need to learn more about that, you can do that there as well. So the last thing I want to talk about, and this is a question that Kathy and I get asked all the time, is does the CNS monitor talk to my electronic medical record? And the simple answer is yes, and the complicated answer is also yes. But what's required for the CNS monitor to speak to your electronic medical record system is some type of middleware, is a middleware program. And the one that might be most commonly used and commonly you might be familiar with is something called Capsule. So Capsule is just a middleware program that allows the devices to speak to one another. It's basically an interpreter. So if you think of your electronic medical record system as speaking one language and the CNS monitor as speaking another language, the middleware program is an interpreter for those languages, and it allows them to talk to one another. So if you have some type of middleware program at your institution, Capsule works great, then the data can indeed be made to upload directly to EMR. So that's another great way for us as nurses and other people to take a look at data. So the one slide I had that I didn't show you, and it's a little bit out of sequence now, but when we actually talked about storing data in the management data file on the CNS monitor, people often ask about, well, how much data storage is required for a case of CNS monitoring. So when we look at this gives us an idea about what we would need in terms of data storage. So every line, every parameter that gets measured on the CNS monitor is considered a trend. So we have a trend of blood pressure, we have a trend of ICP, we have a trend of brain tissue oxygen. So assuming we're monitoring 10 trends, that's going to require about 20 meg per day. Video and EEG obviously are going to consume a lot more space requirements in terms of data storage. So if you're looking at EEG and video and that, excuse me, that type of thing, you're really looking at about requirement of about 5.5 gig per day to be able to store that data locally on the CNS monitor. So that's kind of what we have in terms of data, how you can review it, your options for that, as well as for storage. And I think instead of me continuing to talk, we have a few minutes and we'd like to entertain any questions that you guys might have. And I'll land back on this slide in case that sparks any questions to your mind.
So while we're waiting for the questions to come in, would you mind to show everyone, Tracy, where they can get a link to the recorded sessions and our past sessions?
I would love to do that. So I'm back on the website. And instead of being in the products tab, I'm going to hop over to the education tab. And we always have a picture of Di White Olson there, which is awesome. And up here where it says videos, this tab down to webinars. If I tap webinars, Moberg also offers a series of webinars called Brain Matters, and they usually do those every month, and they typically have a physician or a researcher or an advanced user do some type of demonstration or some type of lecture. And Kathy had mentioned Anna as being our our CNS Reader expert. So if you are going down the path of using the reader or Envision, then Anna will be the one that you're working very closely with. We also then have here all of the previous webinars that Kathy and I have done. So the Basics and Beyond webinars are here. So here's the one that we did in February. Here is, oops, there are previous ones here. Where did they go? There they are, December, October. So if you missed any of our others, please feel free to go back and you can have your colleagues catch up if they didn't have the opportunity to join us. So it usually takes about a week or two for them to go through and kind of tidy up our webinar, and then it will get posted on the website.
Thanks, Tracy.
Sure. Any questions that have come in?
Nope, no questions. You did a fantastic job of really sharing. I think this was really helpful because this is probably one of the most complicated things. It's, I've recorded a tracing, now what, right? So you've really given this really nice overview of kind of the options and flexibility of how to then choose to retrieve, keep, access, review, research, extract, all the data that, all of the data that we get from the CNS monitor. And really the abundance of information we get is a blessing because we can always go back to those files later and slice and dice them many different ways. And so even if these things are not in your kind of daily workflow now, knowing that you've stored the files, these are all things that you can always do later. So whether it's for teaching or in a case example or, or really truly going back and doing a deep dive into some sort of quality improvement or, project or some other IRB approved project where you're looking at specific markers, this data that you have can really be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great. Good.
Thank you, Tracy.
As always, you're welcome. And thank you, Kathy. And as always, you can reach out to us later as questions pop into your mind, because sometimes you just have to think about things a little bit before you can formulate a question. So just know that we're available. And we're, again, please looking for ideas for upcoming webinars. And Kathy, I'm wondering if maybe we want to do one that focuses on some of the neonatal applications. And maybe, you can sort of be the main presenter for that, and we can target some of your neonatal folks, and then maybe we can do one that just targets adults, and we can kind of try to, get more specific type of things, or even more broad ranging, depending on what folks are interested in.
Yeah. So one question popped in. What about in-person training? How do people go about asking for that resource for either hardware and software support?
Oh, yes. So again, just reach out to customer service and they can hook you up with the appropriate person depending on what it is you need. So typically, if we're using the application PC with Persist, that's going to be a different person for training than would, say, Anna, who is supporting the reader. A lot of the training that we do for those products, we actually can do through webinar, and it's really, really effective. We always do on-site training for clinical operation. And if you happen to have, the backpack PC or the CNS reader, we can go through some of it at that point as well. But we've always wanted to at least have done some introductory training by webinar, because that's where we can really show the screens and kind of get into the nitty-gritty. So there's a variety of options for training, and just reach out through customer support and we can direct you to the appropriate person.
Perfect. Well, happy Good Friday to everyone, and to everyone who watches the recording later, whenever day or time is for you.
And happy Easter to all.
Yes. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.